dozens of sales and revenue leaders saw that there was a much bigger pain point actually in the sales space when compared to the finance space, especially just because of like existing infrastructure around tooling and what people were using. So basically 2023, we spent building out the technology, getting listed on the Salesforce App Exchange. We got our SOC 2 compliance, getting all the infrastructure ready and testing it out with some design partners to the point that we're opening it up, getting more customers on board the system, and really evaluating all the different ways that we can help bring business intelligence to everyone, specifically around those Salesforce data. So all of those hairy Salesforce reports that you've struggled through, whether it's joining objects, time series reporting, all of those types of things, that's what we're really trying to take off people's hands.
So can you give us an example? Feel free if you want to share your screen and take us through like a couple of things. Can you give us some sort of examples of what use cases people are currently using it for and where you've had the most success? It's really interesting. You kind of started as well in the finance and then moved into more of the sales space. So you've kind of iterated through and seen where is this technology applicable or not. I'd love to hear more about those areas.
Yeah. So, and I'll do a super quick screen share then. If you can see my Slack, so we plug directly into Slack. And so one of the biggest use cases is really around those ad hoc questions. So if you're a RevOps person or you're on a data team, you spend typically anywhere from 20 to 30% of your time as answering ad hoc questions, like, what was this person's win rate? And so what we've done is you can get the answers directly in Slack, you open it up, and then you can tag your teammates. So this can be for rep hygiene, this can be for team performance monitoring. And then what we've built is within the web app. So if we jump over the web app, this is where we typically see more like deeper strategic insights for both the revenue operations side and then also sales leadership. So within our app, you can see this is a fairly complicated question, right? Can you show our average sales cycle by channel for Q3 versus Q4 and identify which had the largest increase? These types of questions that you would ask this, see the answer and be like, well, that's weird. LinkedIn was only 6.75 days. Like, we probably didn't have that many deals. Like, let's ask about that, right? Let's see how many deals were sourced from TikTok, how many deals were sourced from LinkedIn. So how do you actually iterate through an analysis step by step instead of like shooting those Slack messages to someone on your team or getting on a call with someone? How do you do that in real time so that you can get from like broader question of like, why are we losing deals, to digging into the really specifics by channel, by lead source, by state, to understand what is going on in the business.
Super interesting. So is a way to describe this almost like having a personal data analyst in your pocket that is connected with all of your revenue stack data.
Yeah, RevOps in your pocket. And so we're trying to upskill RevOps professionals. So you spend less time of the annoying data chasing, data cleaning, data aggregating from different sources so that you can use your insights and get directly to, okay, ask a question, get an answer, ask next question that's harder, get next answer. And so we really think that this type of AI co-pilot is going to be a pretty significant driver of efficiency for everybody when it comes to how, in this current environment, can we close more deals, bigger deals, faster for our sales team?
So who is the typical user of this product? Is it really the salespeople themselves? Is it the VP of sales? Is it the revenue ops team? Is it the data team? Who are the typical people actually using the product?
Yeah, so the most common right now is revenue operations, kind of the revenue operations leader, being able to set up the environment. So one of the things we do and have spent a lot of time on is when a customer connects, we build the initial key definitions layer for them. So all of your KPIs and metrics that we can pull out of Salesforce or your Tableau dashboards or other places, we create that so that the system can understand what you're talking about without you having to tell us. So from the revenue operations side, being able to standardize that, have it all in one place, so that now if someone, whether myself or someone else on my team asks a question, it's always going to be defined in a certain way. You don't have to worry about someone pulling revenue from some weird data source that's going to be different between marketing and sales. That's where the revenue operation use case has come from pretty heavily. And then on the like sales leadership side, a lot of that is just the annoying questions of like, I don't want to go into a dashboard. Like, I just don't want to navigate my environment. Like, let me just ask this quick question in Slack. So we're probably like 3/4 on the revenue operations side, and then the final fourth on more of the sales leadership.
And so where does the AI kind of start and the just traditional products kind of end in terms of, and when I ask that question, I'm thinking of, you've obviously got lots of different data sources that you need to link into. And at the moment, it sounds like predominantly this is mainly CRM data. It sounds like you might have other sources as well. But this could effectively, like you said before, you started with finance. So different sources of data are fairly easy to get access to. So maybe that's, the number of emails, maybe it's the ads that you've had, website traffic. It could be a whole host of data, right? So it's kind of linking and aggregating different data sources. Then there's the user-facing part of the product, which is natural language. Can I just ask questions in natural language and be understood? And then there's the kind of translation. So how do we actually take the questions that are being asked and then go and pull out real data from our the different stacks, CRM, et cetera, and make sure that things like we're not hallucinating. Are you doing vector embeddings? What's the kind of bit in between that you're actually transforming?
Yeah, so that's a great question. That's what we spent a lot of time on getting right, because as many people in here have probably seen, the general question of how do you use AI to ask a question and then figure out which table the data is in, which column within that table the data is in, and then which rows within that table, within that column is it coming from, is a really technically hard challenge. So we've built a number of things on our side to help us do that. And that's why we've really started within this sales and Salesforce use case, because there's a little bit more standardization. So the models we've built are fine-tuned and trained specifically to deal with these types of data, so that we know, generally speaking, when we connect your opportunity table, what's going to be in there. You're going to have custom fields, custom objects, but for the most part, we've created this massive data set of questions and like how to navigate these different tables that's really fine-tuned for this use case. And so as we think about scaling and as we grow, as we start adding those other data sources, both for individual companies and then broadly speaking, that's part of the technical challenge that we're working on of, okay, future state 5 years from now, we connect to everything in your organization. You just ask a question. We can combine your ERP data with your Salesforce data, with your Gong data. We'll be able to get things from everywhere. But it's like, how do we go from where we are now to there? And that's a lot of just training of you telling the AI something, and then the AI being able to understand, okay, I need to go to X specific place to get that data.
So you mentioned talking about training the model so that it can understand the different parameters, avoid hallucinations, help it perform better. Are you taking kind of out of the box models and then fine tuning them? Have you built your own models internally? How do you think of this from a technology stack and actually implementing it as a product?
Yeah, so we do a combination. We have some pieces of our technical stack that we built that are totally proprietary that help eliminate those hallucinations, so that when you ask a question, we're not giving you a wrong answer. And then we're using a lot of the different open AI models. So fine-tuned 3.5s, GPT-4 to get a lot of the underlying logic for really code generation. So everything we're using OpenAI for is to generate code, and then we translate that code into getting your data. So the reason we do that is from a security standpoint, then you don't have to worry about OpenAI ingesting any of your data or the data actually going anywhere. All it's doing is when you ask, like, what was our win rate? We're taking that and turning what was my win rate into what code needs to be run over a data table in order to get that information.
Oh, that's super interesting. That kind of answers my follow-up question, which was going to be around, because I saw, you're SOC compliant, which was around the data side of things, because I think you've gone into like the enterprise side and seen there's more product market fit here, which is really great. And I think a lot of AI companies would love to kind of go down that route, but they struggle because of the compliance, the fear behind what is my data going into these models. OpenAI recently announced like team plans. They had like enterprise plans. Now they have something kind of in between, which is team plans. And one of the big features they had there again is we're not going to train on your data. So I think it's like clearly people are understanding that in the business environment, they don't want their data to be used to be trained on. So that's a super interesting kind of way of leveraging it, using AI to create the code to then go and do the pull request. So you're just translating natural language into code rather than actually trying to get the model to do the math or do the search in itself.
That's exactly right. And I think like back in the beginning when ChatGPT first was released, there was one article that came out about like some Samsung email getting leaked through GPT that I think created like 99% of the problems that OpenAI has had and is still having, because they've had all of these policies even around since then of like for API providers or other people, like we're not using your data, we're not training on your data. Candidly, a lot of people just don't trust them, even when you tell them that.
Yeah.
So even though the way we're using it, even if we were to send the data, like in their terms and conditions, they wouldn't be using it. We've still created it in that like security friendly way. Exactly. So that users are comfortable that us as a vendor, they don't have to worry about any of that other third party risk. And then we're also have leveraged Azure through a partnership. So the data, anything goes in Azure. And part of that was we saw very early on, as soon as Microsoft and OpenAI formed this partnership, everybody trusts Microsoft, right? I mean, if you're most enterprises are using Microsoft in some capacity. So to the extent that we can say that your data is being stored in Azure or anything on our side is being used through Azure,
Mm.
that's another way that, as an early stage company, we've been using that to get people comfortable with any of the data agency and kind of our security and compliance.
So switching things up a little bit and more talking about the roles of people within the revenue organization. I think if you look at your product, it's effectively changing. Is there a need to hire a data analyst? Maybe you still need the data analyst, but maybe you don't need as many because the number of internal requests is going to massively sort of shrink. I think like there was a wave of data products that came out, which their goal mainly was to say, how can we let the individual contributor, the rep on the front lines, get access to data and be their own data analyst. The problem with that is it still actually had quite a high barrier to entry, lots of learning, how to figure out going through the tables. Even if it was in no code, it was still somewhat complicated. But this is completely changing the game because I can just say the request completely in natural language without having to have any product ramp in knowledge. So that is going to change the way organizations behave. And one way that is, predicting here, but if anybody can have access to the data, then you can do things quicker, you can take more risks, you can iterate through things a lot better as an organization. What are the kind of key ways that you're seeing the implementation of AI, whether it's through your product or just predictions in general within the revenue organization? How are the way roles are and scorecards are sculpted and hired for going to change in the coming few years?
Yeah, so maybe I'll answer a question you didn't ask first on something that's interesting of we still see a lot of like revenue operations or data analysts who don't necessarily want to give this unfettered access to leadership, right? Because they're going to start asking questions that they really don't know the context for, and they're going to start digging into things that maybe the data is not clean in a certain way, or they don't want to even create that hassle of who gets access to what. So I think from that angle, it's still a dynamic in terms of the way organizations are going to be structured and the way they're going to be created. I think we see this in the short term. There's going to be very massive productivity boosts for the data analysts, like on the revenue operation side, who use tools like this versus like a strict replacement. I don't think you're going to be able to replace headcount anytime in the near future with tools meant to help them, because so much of their job is some of the more context specific strategic advice and implementation that they need to do internally.
Mm.
And so our goal is really thinking about if they're no longer spending that 30% of their time chasing data, creating data for your QBRs, responding to senior leadership, now they have 100% of their time that they can dedicate to those more strategic initiatives of how do we close more deals. And so we like to look at it from that like optimization standpoint where maybe from a headcount perspective, that fifth role that you wanted for your team, you're not going to get. You're just not going to get headcount for that additional person you want to hire. But the four people you have are now absolute rock stars and are like, you don't even need that fifth role anymore that you were going to hire for.
It was the argument that when Copilot came out with GitHub, in the kind of the context of, okay, well, now you can have a junior engineer, effectively a 10x engineer. Is this going to get rid of engineering jobs? And it's like the answer is like no. How many product roadmaps stretch out into the future and are just infinite? And there's always something that needs to be built. It just means we're going to be able to build it 10x quicker and just iterate through. I think it's going to be incredible for the consumer and the end users of the product. And I think it's similar in the sales world. If you're coming from outbound,
Yeah.
um, and outbound conversion rates have massively shrunk over the years because channels just get absolutely hammered. Open rates are sinking, response rates are sinking, cold call rates and connection rates are going down. These channels are becoming really saturated and really hard to penetrate if you're trying to set up an outbound operation. And so being able to have either hyper personalized outreach or much more efficient staff, it's not necessarily that you're going to get rid of any of those SDRs. You just actually need to be able to be more productive just to keep up with the kind of standard conversion rates that you had of yesteryears.
No, I think that's exactly right. I think there's been a lot of discussion. I think Jason Lemkin was talking about this on the SaaStr podcast of how we've added all these new sales tools, but there hasn't necessarily been this like massive efficiency gain in terms of like structuring sales orgs. And I think you highlighted the reason for that is you have to keep up with the Joneses, right? Like as people add these new, more advanced tools, their teams are getting more efficient. So now you're competing against more efficient teams for the same deals. And so I think the organizations that continue to invest in this, the ones that have their SDRs doing, enrichment to get those leads and then automating the outbound with really well personalized emails and then structuring their notes to flow in directly into their Salesforce. Like the people that really take advantage of this are going to continue being at the leading edge. And there's just going to be a significant drop for those organizations that don't keep up.
So have you seen a certain type of organization or customer profile who is really open to adopting? Again, I go back to like the enterprise and thinking this is actually somewhat challenging to penetrate as a market with these products for the reasons that we just discussed. But are you seeing certain types of companies or profiles really leading the way here?
So I think traditionally, right, software technology companies are often more on the leading edge because they have a lot more of the advanced kind of tooling stack already. So it's not as much of a lift for them to try out a new tool like this. Yeah, I think one thing that's been a little bit surprising, and there's like we're still very much in the early innings, but a lot of the more traditional enterprises all have mandates to have AI strategies, to implement AI tools in a way that they really haven't in previous years. And I think like as of today, January 18th, a lot of those companies are like, okay, we have 500 use cases that we can use AI for. Like, where do we start? But I think over the course of the coming years, I think you're going to see a lot of more traditional businesses who really like leadership understands that there's pressure to take advantage of this to really optimize their own internal structures from both like a margin compression standpoint and then even a growth standpoint. And so, we haven't necessarily seen one industry too much stand out, but I think there's going to be a lot of people starting to come around that traditionally wouldn't have been.
I feel like the last year we've seen an increase in just board members kind of pressuring founders on the product strategy. Say, what's your AI strategy from a product perspective? How are you going to implement it and be competitive? I don't. We've seen a number of more mentions of AI in board meetings of like public companies, but it doesn't seem that there's as much of a focus just yet on like how are we going to implement it for productivity use within our company. Everyone is just saying, how can I implement it from a product perspective? Which is
Yeah.
it's kind of interesting. Is it is the demand or the supply there first? But I think that all of those things start with, okay, is there a tangible example where a company has been able to do the same thing with 5 employees instead of 500 employees, or they've been able to produce a better product from the ground up, using AI and throughout all of their organizations or their departments, and then people saying, okay, this is a change or die kind of moment right now, and I'm not sure we've quite hit that mark just yet. From your perspective, what do you think the catalyst is going to be before we hit over that pivot point where enterprises really start to see this as I need to adopt this now, otherwise, we're going to go out of business?
So I think a lot of it is going to come down to how successful the early use cases are. And exactly as you identified, most of them around the product and for customers, right? So a lot of the OpenAI early announcements of who they're working with are things like chatbots for customer service. They're things that directly impact customers of these massive enterprises that makes them both seem AI forward, but they're also more non-deterministic. So things where you can use it for marketing, you can use it well in a lot of these different use cases. And I think as that becomes more pervasive, as those use cases over once they started last year, they continue into this year, are able to kind of prove out the success in the early innings, I think people are going to start taking a look at a lot of what they're doing internally and being like, hey, if our marketing team isn't making we're spending 25% of the time on collateral, now we can do all this cool stuff. Why am I, internal person, still spending all of my time on this manual stuff if I don't
Hmm.
have to? So I think it'll kind of drip through where more of the revenue generating customer facing pieces were the natural first blocks that people tackled last year and then still going into this year. I mean, we're very much in the early innings, but I
Hmm.
think as those initial phases prove out success, I think you're going to start having deeper implementation across the different use cases in the enterprise stack.
I think, Chile, you said someone had a question that you wanted to share.
Yeah, if you don't mind me jumping in, and Trevor, it was just a few moments ago someone had reached out with questions about training teams specifically on how to use generative AI to be making their own chat GPTs. And Damien, do feel free to unmute if I've butchered your question. I want to make sure I capture the moment of it because I was listening when it came in.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, perfect. Okay. Hi, nice to meet you both. So I've spent a lot of time in the last year actually teaching individuals. I'm part of the Uvaro SaaS sales school, so as well like faculty, students, as well as some small, medium the enterprise businesses, how to use generative AI. One thing I'm wondering, because it's really interesting, all the things that you're mentioning about just the need for adoption of these tools. Um, what about the knowledge required in order to be able to interface with these tools effectively and efficiently? Like, would you say that there is a need for individuals, say like myself, to be talking to employees, teams specifically, about how to properly use generative AI so that they can use whatever tools are made available to them internally, or perhaps, now with what Alfie was talking about with regards to the team tier, the business tier of custom GPTs, where, yes, I've had a chance to dabble personally with creating some that can do remarkable things with zero programming experience, which is pretty great. But yeah, just being able to effectively use AI-driven tools with a very extensive, or at least enough knowledge of generative AI so that they can get the job done quickly and efficiently.
Yeah, I can start, and then I'm sure you've got some thoughts too, Alfie. But yeah, I think that there's definitely a big use case for it. I think one of the first things is identifying broadly what are things that everybody can do and use within an enterprise and use it for. So I try and everyone in our company uses it for almost everything, anything we can use it for. Things like our job postings, things like writing onboarding documents, very simple, just language things. A lot of people don't realize how powerful something like this is. And so a lot of it is training and teaching, and even the GPT store, people don't know what this can do. But when you show them okay, I type in this 3-sentence paragraph for write me a job description, and it does a full 95% of the way job rec of what you were looking for, that's an immediate light bulb moment. And so teaching and helping people realize that I think it's hard to really understand until you see it in action with tangible things that are like related to your job or what you're doing.
Yeah, no, I'd add on to that. Just really about expectations setting, and like understanding what are the limitations of various either AI models and or products who implement AI. And I think it comes back to the more you understand actually what's happening behind the scene, and you have your own like correct expectations as to what can be it can be used for, then it starts to get really powerful. We've kind of had this last year where the kind of amazement of typing in the chat and getting some sort of response has been really awe-inspiring. And now we're starting to realize like, okay, that was cool, but how like practical and useful is it? And I think that the real practical applications are, you have to double click, triple click behind just a basic conversation and a kind of a brainstorming session with ChatGPT. But there are some really powerful ones, and I'll give you some like a more clear example. In our own tool, Toolflow, where you can build your own AI tools and workflows. You can, for example, build a tool prepackaged prompt that will make a blog post for you. And that's really powerful and the execution's there. But where AI is really strong is in the execution, but whether it's not as strong is in the judgment. So, for example, after this AMA, I can take the call recording and transcribe it and then create a blog post from it. And I can make a prompt for that. But if I leave it down to AI to kind of figure out what, use AI's judgment as to what is a good talking point or a good narrative, it might not produce a really great piece of work. Whereas if I use my human judgment and then just give those instructions, it's going to produce something really, really powerful. And it's just this very small kind of change in terms of understanding, okay, it's great for execution, maybe not so good for judgment, because, these models are trained on the internet and publicly available data. When you think about human judgment, it's, hey, we've had a conversation offline. I've met this person at an event and they spoke about this experience they had, and years of your own personal experiences on top of things that are available on the internet. So just teaching people, I think, with inside organizations, like how does this thing actually work and what are the limitations is probably going to be the real unlock in terms of how do we get the best out of it.
I feel like with kind of the advent of the custom GPTs that are now available, that ability to now create training data with the use of knowledge files, right? Even if you're going to interface with third-party applications, right, using the actions and whatnot, it's making it easier from even a teaching point of view. Like before them, there was a lot of like, well, this is the really granular breakdown of how to get the prompts to encourage or make the GPT do what you want. But if you're now interfacing with custom GPTs that are trained to sort of do most of that, like they understand the intent behind what it is that you're doing, it does make it easier. Like yes, you still need to understand what you're doing in the application, and you have to make the GPT understand that. But the amount of prompting required is a lot less for it to do what it is that you need to do. Things that come to mind very quickly is just stuff like personalization, right? That's a really big problem that a lot of people who don't know what they're doing run into, right? They're just getting these constant generic statements where the output it's very dismissible because it lacks that touch. But yeah, the custom GPTs I'm finding are making that sort of thing a lot easier to do. Yeah.
I'd love to have like maybe a show of hands or just a kind of a yes no in the chat. How many people have either used a GPT or created one or have never even heard of them before? Just we're kind of interested to see how many people are actually using this. So Spencer, you've got your thumbs up there. Is that you've made one, you've used one? Got Paresh there as well.
Used.
Used, yeah. And what have you been using it for, Spencer?
So in my role in customer success, but working with outbound BDR teams, mostly using it for helping me to come up with different and creative ways to change up sequences, change up wording and getting more open rates, getting better, engagement and stuff on behalf of my customers.
That's awesome. I'd love if anybody else wants to go off mute and share what they've been using it for recently. I know they've just announced the marketplace, so there's a bunch of new cool things that have been out there. I think Paresh, you've got your hand raised there. I don't know if you
Yeah,
available to go off mute.
no, absolutely. I think, I second Spencer's, thought. I have used it as well, especially to improvise my emails, personalized. I think that's one of the use cases, but there are many more that I would love to explore. Uh, yeah, early days, but it's a good one. It's really a good assistant. I would put it that way. And I agree to your point. It's good on execution, but it still lacks, what do you call it? The human judgment like thing, which may probably evolve in the near future. I don't see uh, that's far fetched.
Yeah, maybe we have to wait for AGI before the judgment actually gets to a decent
Yeah.
level. Sheila, I think you said there was another question.
Yeah, there was. I got thrown into the chat. Katie, do you mind reframing it? I would love to hear what
Yes.
prompted it.
Um, I work in ed tech space, and so we work along all different age ranges, and I'm very aware that from an AI perspective, there is a generational shift of understanding, adoption, and all of that. And I wonder, it's everywhere from like customers actually knowing how to use it to actually like, how do you talk with leadership who might not fully understand the complexity of this? Do you have any insights around, I don't want to have to say it's the age range, but there is a level of tech savviness that you might be able to align to an age range there?
I don't know, Trevor, if you have a particular answer in mind. I'll let you go first if so, but I have some thoughts.
Yeah, I think one interesting thing is like our interns this summer were all undergrads, and their proficiency with using it like was probably exceeding mine. And so you could tell how quickly they had caught on and were using it for really like everything that they're doing. I think generally what I've seen is as you get up in that age range, the way you explain the tool goes more to end use case versus like technically what's happening. So a lot more of it is like, we can solve this problem with it that you're facing, or like, here's the general idea of how we get from A to B, and this is just a tool to do it. And that makes it a little bit more approachable and manageable. Whereas like the people that are really technical will be like, oh my God, this is amazing. Like I can swap out email sequences specifically so that we can do this like outbound targeted. Whereas like if you're trying to bring this up to CEO for the first time, you really just want to be like, we can use something like this to make our sales team more efficient so that our emails hit better. And so like I've found dressing it down almost and making it simpler has at least helped the conversation with some of those people.
Yeah, I think what you mentioned there about the use case is I think spot on. If you can demonstrate what it is through something that's actually practical, that's way easier to kind of explain it as opposed to trying to explain it theoretically and then get them to onboard it. The beautiful thing about it is because you can just speak in natural language, it is actually fairly easy to get like a working use case and be like, okay, just ask it to write an email, and then it writes one, and then they ask, well, how did it do that? And then you can kind of go into the the bits after. But I definitely think use case driven is probably the way to go. Evelyn, you mentioned in the chat there, ChatGPT is your marketing intern. I'd love to hear. I know we've spoken offline a few of the examples that you've been using it, but maybe you can share how have you been leveraging ChatGPT as a marketing intern?
Yeah, I mean, I use it a lot for brainstorming when it comes to copywriting, but I recently used it for the first time to write a conference pitch, and it worked like amazingly well. I just asked it to look at like all the FAQs about what they were looking for the conference, the structure they wanted. And then I pulled in like our founders just raw notes from what he wanted to talk about. And it literally in like one go with a good prompt just created something that was like perfect for what they needed. So it's been just crazy to like play around with it. And I think maybe coming back to that previous question as well, like showing people how it works for something that they do or they need to do pretty frequently, I think is the best way to like get them interested or on board. I recently actually helped my brother, which is like a separate thing, but I helped him rewrite his resume and cover letter and just like showed him the steps, and he was like, wow, this literally took me like 5 hours to get this far. And it's like, it completely changed like my process now. So yeah, I think Damon, you're saying it too in the chat, like make sure it's something that's really relevant for the person. And then just kind of like show them in real time, and also that it's like super easy. You can just like talk to it, but given enough details. So yeah, it's been just really fun to like try to get people on board in my environment.
The resume use case you just mentioned, someone built a tool on Toolflow for that, where you had your resume and then they have the job description for like 10, 15 different jobs. So I know back in the day, whenever I'd apply for jobs, and it's like, okay, you need to personalize it. And I'd spend ages saying, okay, what's the job they want? What are the key responsibilities? And how do I highlight this in each CV? And I had like 15
Yeah.
different ones. It'd take me ages. Now you can just kind of like, pop it in your CV, the job description, and then it will do it for you, which is pretty awesome. I'm not sure if there's any questions there in the chat. Maybe you can just check for us, Sheila.
Not questions, but shares. Some cool uses thrown in there.
Okay, should we talk to relevancy is key in both accomplishments and detailed benefit solutions, commonly felt pains. Great way to automate small tasks to make more efficient. Stole workflow, good art. Yeah, stole a workflow, good artists create great artists still. That's a great quote. That's a question I have actually for you, Trevor, with relation to your particular like product and your vision of how kind of verticalized AI products versus these generalized models that are then building these experiences. So you and I are both building companies which are, somewhat verticalized products, whereas then you have models which then have chat interfaces that then create features which are more generalist. But let's take ChatGPT, actions, GPTs. You can connect to different things through actions, use Zapier to execute a task and integrate with your other tools. There is like a whole host of startups that have kind of gone down that route of connecting tools and then having some sort of actions on there. What's your vision of, where are these generalist kind of big models and their experiences they're building for consumers go in? And where do you think the market positioning is for companies like ours who are focusing on, very specific pain points?
Yeah, so I think it's going to come down a lot to workflow. I think the generalist models, like we're never going to be able to compete with OpenAI when it comes to like a general like CSV analyzer, right? Or like what they've created with Code Interpreter. Like competing against that is going to be really challenging. But I think you're always going to have a layer between enterprises and AI models. And you have software companies like ours that can help these people specifically solve their problems through workflows, right? And so the question comes, how do you specialize it and how do you point it in the right direction and how do you train it to do the things that people want it to do? And so we're taking kind of similar approaches when it comes to like verticalized workflow solutions where, yeah, I mean, unless OpenAI and Microsoft are the only two companies in the country, and I think we have other issues anyway, like there's gonna be lots of room for different like workflow type SaaS solutions. And so that's where we're really trying to slot in.
Awesome. And I think we've got David has raised his hand here with a question, and then I've seen the time, so we'll start wrapping up after this question. If anyone's got any questions, put them in the chat or raise your hand and we'll go through these as the last one before we wrap up. David, do you want to unmute and ask away?
Yeah, thanks, Alfie and Trevor. Great to meet you guys. Less question, more of a statement. So I represent that older group of people. I'm 50 plus. Anyways, my first kick at the can with this this past summer was I needed to create an SOP and I'd never done one before. So I just asked it to do that for me, and boom. And it's like it gave me the solution. I just filled in the blanks, and my boss was happy that I used the standardized SOP format. I'm like, that wasn't me, that was ChatGPT, but whatever. But I got very curious with it. I was part of a class with Damien, and he was the one that had brought it up, and I started getting very curious with it. So that was my first use, and then I'm like, let's see if we can break this. I throw all kinds of ideas at him, like, teach me this, teach me that. Like I ask it to teach me I want to learn like a higher level mathematics, Fourier analysis. What do I need to know in order to understand how to do this? It gave me all these lists of, analytical geometry, different types of calculus, blah, 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 all this sort of stuff. I'm like, oh, okay, let's try this. I've tried the meal plan, I've tried the exercise plan. And one of the other most useful things I've asked it to do, I've been encouraged by a number of people to write a book. And so I started going, right, I'm going to go from writing a book perspective, and I asked it to interview me and say, like, this is the use case scenario, and give me 10 questions based on blah, 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 asking, like you're interviewing me for this book. And then it gives me a list of questions. And that was like a way to help stimulate my thought process to get into writing. And so I've been using it for a lot of different things. It's a very amazing piece of technology. It's like, get on the board, get on the bus, or you're gonna get run over by it. That's the way I see it, right? So
sounds like the book writing one, you could probably make your own custom GPT and help other people write books if you've got some kind of good processes around the brainstorming. I think that's going to be a very popular one. Evelyn, I think you had a question in here specifically for Trevor. If you want to unmute and ask away.
Yeah, so I'm currently on a mission to try to get better visibility and communication cross-departmentally when it comes to metrics, specifically like sales data. We use a lot of different tools. So right now, sales is on Salesforce, marketing is on HubSpot. I'm trying to get them to communicate, but there's a lot of custom fields. Also, like there's qualifying notes that I can't get to transfer. So I'm guessing there's like a lot that I can do with something like Myko as well. I'm curious if you've like connected multiple systems before, what like best practices might be and how Myko might be able to help. Specifically also like around notes, like is there a way for it to analyze like themes and notes from closed won deals over the past quarter? That's like a very specific use case I have in mind. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great. So that is something we can do on the notes front, generally speaking, like being able to like synthesize the unstructured text. It's not as specific. So if you're trying to like reference specific deal notes, it gets a little bit more challenging just on how we've created it. I think like taking a step back broadly, what you're struggling with is what a lot of people who have a sales environment where they're using both HubSpot and Salesforce struggle with. Typically where we slot in is for a lot of like being able to combine some of those like one-to-one questions when you know half of the answers in HubSpot, half the answers in Salesforce. What a lot of people do wind up doing is yes, you can, which your team's probably looking at already, which is piping in the HubSpot data into Salesforce and like creating that table like a custom object. The other way is setting up some sort of data warehouse, whether it's Snowflake, Redshift, where you have all of it going into one place. And then whether it's us or another BI tool, once it's all in that one system, it becomes much easier. It's a little bit more challenging when they are just like both CRMs separately. So I think as you like, and we can always talk offline about it as well, but we see a lot of people going through that process of like, okay, how do we really unite the data so that we can get all the value we're looking for out of it?
Is that
cool? Yeah, definitely in that process.
Would that be somewhat of a limitation of the way that you use AI in terms of using it to create code to then query something, as opposed to one thing AI is really good at when you just use the model straight out of the box is trying to understand patterns from somewhat disparate information or data, being able to make sense out of unstructured information. Is that something that if you were able to build like a model internally in-house, that you would be able to match these things up more easily?
Yeah, I think so. So like with the situation she's describing, right, of like analyzing and synthesizing notes, like in that example, like we wouldn't be able to generate code for that. Like that would be getting sent to like GPT-4 as like a piece of like what we've trained it on to do. So it's like the combination of like our system and then the broader like AI system for that. And so like as both get more evolved, like exactly what you're describing would be the case.
That's super interesting. I think that's a really powerful use case. I mean, there's in like the outbound prospecting case, from background, most of my career has been spent, building and scaling outbound revenue teams. And so a lot of kind of cold email prospection, generating pipeline from that way. And one of an absolute gold mine was always lost deals or so deals that we had information on to a certain degree and they either ghosted or went cold or didn't buy for one reason or another. And then kind of going back and then looking at those and saying, okay, what was the reason that it fell through then? Maybe it was a feature we didn't have yet, or they, just hired a new person, or whatever it may be. And then being able to just go back and say, okay, this is the right time to actually reach out to those. And they always were super high converting if you got back to them. And I feel like being able to get that data when it's so disparate between different systems would be super powerful.
Exactly. Especially if you have good notes on it.
Yes, which is the hard thing because salespeople don't like putting notes in the CRM.
It is. Trying to get better at that.
Especially around the closed lost. They like once it's lost, it becomes less interesting.
Exactly. Awesome. Well, thank you very much, everyone. We'll wrap up there. But just to let people know, how can people reach you, contact you? Is there anything else you would like to kind of plug or share with the community here, Trevor?
Yeah, so Trevor at Myko AI. I'm also in the Toolflow Slack community, so feel free to ping me if you have any general like sales, RevOps, data types of questions. Happy to answer them. We're still in a open beta, so it's free to use our product if you want to try it out and connect to your different data sources. So we're looking to make customers happy right now. So if you think we can solve your pain point, we'd love to make something happen.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm going to just share in the chat quickly for everybody two things. The link to the community. If you're not already in Slack, there's the link to become part of the community. And for all those people that have joined, thank you very much for staying the whole way. Thank you for all your questions and sharing your experiences. It's sessions like this where we share information and learn and grow together, which personally I find really rewarding, but I think it's a super great way to learn. And please feel free to post your questions and learnings and cool things you're playing with in the Slack community and continue the sharing offline. With that being said, have a great rest of the day and we'll catch you for the next one.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Alfie. Thanks, Sheila.
Take care. Bye-bye.